Hey guys, and welcome to the Cow Emporium. I'm back. Have you missed me? I got myself a little busy this summer, so anyway, it's great to be here. Glenn asked if I would do not another garden update, but we're going to talk about today, if you would join me, what we like and what we don't like about how we're using these 30-inch beds in the big garden. Let's take a look at the garden. And thanks for liking and subscribing to our channel, you guys. We really appreciate it. As we enter the big garden, there's a 4-foot pathway that really works for us. And there's lots of room for our wagon. There's lots of room for us to work, even with this tall sunflower row there, which, by the way, is looking beautiful. We found the space between the 30-inch beds, 18 inches. It works good. Even works good for me. Of course, Glenn's, takes up less space in the world. One thing we're going to talk about here, let's start down at the end. We did let some dill go to seed in the rows. Dill apparently is a good pest deterrent. We love growing the carrots in these 30-inch beds like this. And we use the divoter, so they're spaced about an inch to an inch and a half apart. That works really well. It makes it super easy to water them. The one thing with the carrots when they first start coming up is that they're pretty weedy. Let's move over to the onion row. This is my Walla Walla onions. I planted these from seed. Our one complaint about planting onions this way, if you remember, we planted them in threes and 3 rows apart, the 30-inch bed. This space here happened to be some gourmet shallots, and I wasn't really happy with those. Those were from sets, so I pulled them all out. I'm either going to dry them or freeze them. Next, we have red onions, and you can see how the onions are growing in a clump of 3. And the market gardener suggested that would be an easier way to weed the onions. However, we have found quite the opposite. Once they get a little bigger, it's hard to get between them. This was a group of scallions, also planted from sets, and I pulled all but 5 or 6 of these guys because they were starting to die, their tops were, and they weren't really gaining any size. Now these are our yellow onions that we're going to be saving for storage. Gosh, these are going to be beautiful, you guys. But also you see the jungle in there. Like there is enough onions in there now that it's hard to even get your hand in there to weed them. So I wasn't super impressed. And later I'm going to show you a different example of how I planted later onions because we already knew that we didn't want to plant them like this again. We are loving this 30-inch bed style. And some things work really well, like these leeks and the beets. There's parsnips and turnips there. Even the radishes work super well in this type of growing style. As our garden is laid out so that it runs north to south, we can optimize the use of the sun to grow things. So Glenn has talked about how we're using sunflowers, corn, dill, and tomatoes to create windbreaks in our garden. That's because the wind can blow quite fiercely here. As it is still morning time, you can see the vegetables on the west side of something that's tall are quite shaded still. However, come lunchtime, the opposite will be true. The whole garden will be in the sunshine. This is a look from the west side of our row of sunflowers. You can see that the potatoes planted on the other side are quite shaded by it yet. And Glenn said that next year, if we were to plant like this, then he would leave, say, another foot to a foot and a half of space between the sunflowers and the first row of potatoes. However, because the sun kisses everything in the garden, we have found that the potatoes growing on the west side of those tall sunflowers are growing quite well, and just as big, or if not bigger, than some of the other potatoes in the garden. One of the smartest things we did when we set up the big garden this year was to cut the garden in half. And so that gave us 50-foot beds. Glenn installed a watering station right in the center of the garden. And there is buried lines there. One is coming from the house and one is coming from the big tank that he fills from the dugout. And that allows us to easily run hoses down to all the rows in the garden when something needs watered. And we use 50-foot sections of hose. Weeping hose, Glenn has explained the watering, but just for example, this is my sister-in-law's carrots, and he has 2 hoses in here that he's connected with a T, which couldn't be more convenient because these are, in fact, right by the watering station. All in all, we're pretty happy using a 50-foot hose to water the beds, as we have found a 100-foot length of hose daunting to try to move between the rows and get set up to water each bed individually. These are the most recent beds that Glenn has formed, and some of the last plantings that will happen here at the Cow Emporium for the summer of 2022. Now here are the onions that I want to show you. We have 4 rows of onions, and we've given them a good space. These were also sets, and they are scallions. So these were meant to be green onions. However, green onions still grow a bulb. So if we miss them when they're young, we'll still harvest them for use later. More Swiss chard and beans coming, and also a small row of beets, as most of our beets are at the optimal size right now. So in between the potatoes and the sunflowers, we have this beautiful row of corn coming. Now we know ideally you would plant corn in rows close together. So we might actually take this one 50-foot row and make 3 shorter rows side by side for best pollination of the corn. However, we really wanted this corn to just be a windbreak for the garden. And if we get some cobs to eat, that's wonderful. And the cows will enjoy it in the spring when we dig it out. They love corn. This is also a great use of space to grow those squashes. And last but not least, the cucumber row and the tomatoes and some summer squash are growing down here. All in all, I can say that we are quite pleased. And thank goodness for the rain that we had at the beginning of the season, or none of this would have been possible. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you all are doing well. It's so lovely to see you again. Take care. Bye for now.